First, a look at some protectionism history. In the first half of the 19th century, Britain imposed import tariffs designed to protect British farmers and landowners from competition posed by cheap foreign grain products. These import taxes raised food prices in English cities because they were forced to buy the more expensive domestic product instead of the cheaper foreign product, thus forcing reluctant industrialists to pay higher wages so their workers could afford to eat. In the run-up to the American Civil War, the northern industrial states wanted high tariffs to protect their emerging manufacturing interests from European competition, while the southern states wanted low tariffs because they imported much of what they consumed, from linens to farm machinery. And this is another instance of the classic me and my money versus my country conflict, which is a common theme throughout this course. Here's another historical anecdote. In the 1970s and 80s, the U.S. auto industry faced its first major challenge from foreign competition as Japanese automakers aggressively entered the American market. Our response was that as Japan's share of the U.S. market grew, the big three U.S. automakers convinced the government to impose a cap on the number of cars Japan could ship to the U.S. And in 1981, the Reagan administration agreed to impose restraints because the auto and auto parts industries were major employers in the U.S. Moreover, such employment was largely concentrated in a number of politically pivotal states. Unfortunately, the annual import limit had the perverse effect of encouraging Japanese companies to change the product mix of vehicles they shipped to the U.S., sending more upscale models where the profits were greatest, and fewer cheaper cars. It is estimated that at its peak, the quota was transferring about $5 billion a year to additional profits to Japan's automakers who could sell their quota-limited cars at a premium. So despite protection, the auto industry continued to lose market share because Toyota, Nissan, and Honda simply jumped over the trade barrier and began manufacturing cars in the U.S. This is an example of a response or retaliation to protectionism that I described earlier. We cannot act in a vacuum. Our actions provoke actions from others which may hurt us even more than the original irritant. Here's a more recent example of protecting. In 2003, Indiana solicited bids on a contract to upgrade the state's unemployment insurance computers. The lowest bid came from a U.S. subsidiary of Tata Consultancy, an Indian company. That's India, not Indiana. Tata's bid of $15 million was $8 million less than the next lowest bid. And no Indiana firms even bid on the contract because none were big enough to do the job, and so it was initially awarded to Tata. But following a political backlash, the governor canceled the contract, paid Tata $1 million for the work they'd already done, and broke up the task into smaller pieces so Indiana companies could bid on it. The outcome was that the work was kept in state. However, even after compensating for income paid and taxes earned and paid by citizens of Indiana, which resulted from awarding it locally, the difference is still in the millions. There's no doubt it cost the state more to buy Indiana instead of buying India. So what's more important, taxpayers' money or taxpayers' jobs? Here are some of the important takeaways regarding protectionism and offshoring. Protectionism often backfires, as was the case with the U.S. automakers and Toyota. Loopholes, which I've referred to as responses or retaliation, are pursued with a vengeance. It usually does not prevent offshoring in the long term anyway, but can only forestall it. Communism and socialism are extreme forms of protectionism, as China and India, formerly both more communistic and socialistic, as they have relaxed their restrictions and participate in the global economy, they have prospered greatly. Protection is usually harmful in the long term as it stifles innovation and job creation. Who improves more during a period of protection, the protected company, industry, or the unprotected competitor? I like to compare this to a professional athlete. Would they become better if they could take a year off and do nothing but practice, no competitions? Or does competition push them to improve more? You can probably think of examples where either strategy might work better, but which one do you think works more often? My own experience is that competition and performing push people to use their practice time more effectively. Without that pressure, practice can become ineffective. Finally, I think if you shop at Walmart or similar stores like I do, we are essentially choosing to save our own money over supporting domestic companies and products, as most of the products in these stores come from other countries. For example, in 2004, 70% of Walmart commodities came from China. In my research, I noticed that several offshoring opponents quoted from the same book entitled Global Trade and Conflicting National Interests. So I bought and read the book, which is not really anti-offshoring. However, the authors do make some powerful arguments about certain situations where protectionism can be a good thing. Here are some key points. When growing an industry to compete internationally, Japan's auto industry was protected before it became successful abroad. And I'll admit that this example runs counter to my athlete analogy on the previous slide. The Japanese car makers were able to use their protected or practice time more effectively than most in order to prepare for breaking into the U.S. market in a much bigger way. And the high costs and other factors involved with this industry make it a retainable one, meaning that once it has been won, it is easier to hold on to. This suggests that protecting in order to win a retainable industry might actually be a good strategy from a country perspective. Protecting might also be beneficial when trading with an equal partner as opposed to a partner who is better and or cheaper, or in other words, a partner who has an absolute advantage. Winning market share from an equal partner can benefit or be retained by the winner, but this is not true if the partner is genuinely better or cheaper. The authors also point out that offshoring and outsourcing to an equal partner doesn't really make a lot of economic sense. It only makes sense when the partner has some sort of advantage in that product or industry. And finally, protecting can help soften the blow for affected workers. Though this can increase taxes and or prices for a larger group of people, it gives displaced workers time to adjust.